On January 7, 2025, a surprise attack occurred on the 472 bus running through Woolwich, southeast London. The sound recorded by the microphone system on the bus was filled with screams, chaotic footsteps, and panicked cries for help from passengers. At the same time, the security camera on the bus recorded the image of two teenagers quietly walking up to the upper floor, sitting in silence for a few seconds, then suddenly rushing towards the target with a shiny knife in hand. The atmosphere on the bus changed from quiet to chaotic in just a moment. The screams and chaos on the bus that morning sparked a large-scale investigation by the London police. From the images and sounds captured, the authorities began to trace the identities of the two suspects, clarifying the developments and causes leading to the attack. The victim was Kellyan Bokassa, 14, a student who had just returned to school after the holidays. According to his mother, Marie Bokassa, Kellyan was a sensitive, ambitious boy who was well liked by his family, friends, and teachers. He dreamed of becoming a rapper and spent a lot of time cultivating his musical interests. At the time of the incident, Kellyan was reportedly carrying a pocket knife. The perpetrators were two teenagers aged 15 and 16, who police determined had no clear personal relationship with Kellyan. However, the bus camera recorded the two boarding the bus together and moving purposefully towards Kellyan's seat, suggesting that the approach was planned from the start. Prior to the incident, Kellyan had a troubled childhood. As a teenager, he was expelled from school for disciplinary violations, forcing him to leave his familiar learning environment. Sometime later, Kellyan was placed in the child welfare system, living away from his family and having to adapt to a completely new environment. During this period, he began to attract the attention of street gangs, who often prey on vulnerable young people. Kellyan's mother, Marie Bokassa, noticed signs of change in her son, from an emotional and musical boy to a withdrawn one, sometimes spending hours away from home without explanation. She tried to seek help from the school, social services, and even talking to her son directly, hoping to get him back on the safe path. But those efforts gradually became hopeless as the distance between mother and son grew. All of this created a simmering tragedy, foreshadowing the event that would strike on January 7, 2025. On the morning of January 7, 2025, Kellyan had just left an appointment at the Youth Counseling Center, where he often went for support and guidance after difficulties in school and life. On the way to the bus stop, he kept looking around, occasionally turning his head to check behind him to see if anyone was following him. When the 472 bus stopped, Kellyan stood at the door for a few more seconds before getting on, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes darting around the cabin. Instead of choosing an empty seat on the lower deck, he headed straight up the narrow stairs leading to the upper deck, his steps somewhat hurried. At the end of the row of seats by the window, Kellyan sat down, leaned his back against the seat, and tilted his head out, as if to separate himself from the common space of the bus. His sitting posture and his eyes constantly looking out at the road showed that he still carried within him a silent vigilance. There was no evidence or testimony that Kellyan and the two teenagers had ever argued or had any prior conflict. However, the audio recording from the bus system captured an unusual atmosphere. Heavy footsteps toward the back of the compartment, the sound of chairs clattering, and the sounds of heavy breathing mixed with the low murmurs of some passengers. The normally quiet space upstairs suddenly became tense, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen. As the two teenagers closed in, Kellyan reacted immediately. He pulled his backpack up to his chest, hugging it tightly, as if to create a makeshift barrier between himself and his opponent. His shoulders hunched, his body leaning forward slightly to provide better protection. He had a pocket knife with him, but the situation was so fast that he didn't have time or the ability to pull it out. It all happened in a few breaths, before the tense atmosphere exploded into chaos. As the 472 bus pulled away from the station, a security camera on the upper staircase captured the two teenagers taking each step, their shoulders tilted slightly to avoid hitting the narrow railing. The fluorescent lights cast shadows on their faces, highlighting their eyes focused on the back of the compartment. As soon as they reached the bottom step, one of them looked straight at Kellyan and flashed a brief, unreadable smile, a moment both chilling and unusual. They stopped in the middle of the aisle, just a few feet away from Kellyan. For a few seconds of silence, no one spoke, but every little gesture revealed the initiative. A teenager's hand slipped into his coat, his head leaned forward slightly, his feet shifted slightly to maintain balance. Then suddenly a long machete blade was pulled out, the steel glinting in the dim light on the car's ceiling, creating a cold light. Without wasting any more time, the two charged forward simultaneously. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the floor, and the seats shook as they closed in on their target. Their swiftness and coordination caused the entire bus to freeze. Their actions were not spontaneous, but rather premeditated before they set foot on the bus. In about 14 terrifying seconds, the two teenagers attacked. Kellyan only had time to pull his backpack to cover himself, but the thin fabric could not stop the opponent's strength and aggression. The slashes fell one after another, leaving more than 27 fatal wounds on his body. The sound of metal clashing, the screams of passengers and rapid breathing mixed together to create a chaotic scene. Kellyan struggled in despair. His voice rang out, "Help! I've been stabbed!" Then choked into a sob, "I want my mum!" He staggered to his feet, trying to back up the stairs, but lost his balance and collapsed. Kellyan's small body lay motionless, blood staining the floor of the car. Although the passengers tried to stop the bleeding and called an ambulance, the wound was so severe, the injuries were fatal, making any hope of saving his life hopeless. Immediately after the attack, the screams of passengers echoed throughout the car, mixed with people calling for help and crying in panic. Some people immediately ran forward, shouting loudly to stop the car. The driver quickly activated the emergency alarm and stopped the car at the next stop. In that chaotic moment, the two teenagers involved in the attack took advantage of the opening, rushed down the stairs, and fled the car, leaving behind a scene of scattered backpacks, bloodstains, and shocked passengers. Some people stood there, stunned, while others tried to call for help from passers-by. An emergency call was sent to Woolwich police, who were called in. Within minutes, multiple patrol units and ambulances were on scene, cordoning off the area and starting a manhunt for the suspect based on witness descriptions and CCTV footage. Investigators quickly began investigating the scene after sealing off the area. Investigators collected all the data from the bus CCTV system, including images and audio, and also extracted security cameras from nearby roads. The recordings show every detail of the attack, from the moment the two teenagers walked up to the upper deck and approached Kellyan to the brutality that took place in just a few dozen seconds. At the morgue, the autopsy was conducted according to strict forensic procedures. The report showed that Kellyan's body bore more than 27 machete wounds, distributed mainly on the chest, back, and arms. The wounds were of different depths and angles, indicating that the attack was continuous and intense. The forensic conclusion determined the time of death to be at the scene, due to rapid blood loss combined with severe damage to vital organs. Immediately after sealing off the scene, the Metropolitan Police Department mobilized several specialized investigative units to coordinate the handling of the case. The forensic team began collecting all physical traces on the bus: blood samples, fingerprints, shoe prints on the floor, and even fabric fibers caught on the seats. The machete knife was identified as the main murder weapon, but was not found at the scene, forcing the police to check the suspect's escape routes for traces. At the same time, the Data Analysis Department extracted all images and audio from the bus CCTV system. Every frame was carefully examined, from the moment the suspect appeared at the bus stop to when he left the vehicle. A series of security cameras from shops and traffic lights around the Woolwich area were also seized to reconstruct their movements before and after the crime. Of the two suspects, the image of one teenager was particularly striking: a lean figure wearing a dark hooded jacket, who climbed into the car with an unusual calmness. His eyes scanned the interior of the car before stopping on Kellyan, the corners of his mouth twitching for a split second as if he were smiling. He stood still for a few seconds, his left hand holding his crossbody backpack, his right hand moving slightly in his jacket pocket, as if checking for something inside. This coolness and initiative were quickly recognized by investigators as a sign of a carefully calculated plan, not a spontaneous act. After analyzing all the camera data and witness statements, the police determined that immediately after leaving the bus, the two teenagers ran towards the Thames River. A roadside surveillance camera recorded one of the two holding a long object wrapped in a coat, moving quickly, occasionally looking back. A few minutes later, images from another camera showed the suspect stopping at a deserted riverbank, bending down to throw the object into the water and continuing to walk away. Believing that this could be the murder weapon, an underwater search unit was immediately deployed. In cold water and low visibility conditions, divers conducted sonar scans and dove into the area. Just a few hours later, they recovered a long machete knife with a steel blade still stained with blood. A quick examination at the scene confirmed that the DNA on the murder weapon matched Kellyan Bocasa's sample. From there, investigators narrowed down the location of the two teenagers' hideout using a combination of phone location data, public transport information, and statements from local sources. The trail led to Eltham, a quiet residential area about 6 kilometers from Woolwich. On the night of 14th to 15th January, armed police surrounded two separate houses. At around 5 a.m., while it was still dark, the raid team entered simultaneously. At one house, the 15-year-old suspect was restrained in his bedroom, still wearing the same dark clothes as in the CCTV footage. At the second location, the 16-year-old suspect was arrested while sleeping, with many items confiscated from the room for investigation. Both were handcuffed and led out in silence, the blue and red lights of the police cars illuminating the streets still covered in early morning mist, ending an 8-day manhunt. After being arrested and taken to the police station, The two teenagers were questioned separately, following the procedure for those under 18. During the first few sessions, they remained reserved, mostly silent or gave brief answers, and requested the presence of a lawyer and guardian. The investigators presented the evidence one by one. CCTV footage of the entire attack, direct statements from passengers, DNA testing results on the machete knife recovered from the Thames, and phone location data consistent with the escape route. Faced with each piece of evidence, they initially denied any preparation, but could not provide a reasonable explanation for why they appeared together on the bus and carried weapons. When a close-up video from the upper deck of the bus was shown, showing each action from the time of approach to the attack, both of them just bowed their heads and remained silent for a long time. Faced with the weight of the evidence, the final testimony changed. With their lawyers present, both teenagers admitted to directly participating in the attack that resulted in the death of Kellyan Bokassa, and also confessed to possessing the knife. The formal guilty pleas were recorded in court on May 23rd, closing the investigation and moving to the trial stage. The prosecutor and the police then completed their case. All the footage from the bus, CCTV along the route, and the Thames area was arranged in chronological order to reconstruct the entire incident. Witness statements, from passengers on the bus to passers-by and emergency workers, were recorded, transcribed, and compared with the video data. Key pieces of evidence, such as the machete, the victim's backpack, and the suspect's clothing when he was arrested, were sealed and examined. All the data is assembled into a complete indictment, clearly presenting the key details and proving the continuity of the criminal conduct. This is a solid basis for bringing the case to public trial in a criminal court. At the Old Bailey, both teenagers stood in the dock with their lawyers and legal guardians present. When asked to respond to the charges, they admitted to the murder and possession of a knife. The courtroom fell silent as the confessions were recorded. The prosecution said the case was a classic example of the brutality of knife crime among young people, where even a spontaneous act can have irreversible consequences. The judge agreed, stressing the dangers of carrying and using weapons in public. Throughout the trial at the Old Bailey, the two defendants maintained a stoic demeanor, showing little emotion. Testimony revealed that at least one had been exploited by gangs as a child and was described as a victim of child criminal exploitation, a detail the defense used to explain the circumstances and untreated psychological trauma. The trial was conducted in a dignified manner, with no signs of disturbance. Although the courtroom was well lit, the atmosphere was somber, reflecting the gravity of the crime and the pain it left on the victim's family and the community. The jury sentenced both defendants to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 15 years and 10 months to be served before they could be considered for parole. They were each given an additional 12 months for illegal possession of a knife, but this was to be served concurrently with their original sentence.
As I have already stated, there will be life sentences in each of your cases. Taking as the appropriate start point for the minimum term 17 years, then balancing the very serious and significant aggravating factors identified and making some allowance for maturity, leads to an initial uplift to 22 years, and then a reduction down to 19 years, then allowing credit for plea, a minimum term of 15 years, 10 months. That may also be expressed as 15 years, 300 days. The days on remand number 190, and those days will therefore be deducted from the minimum term. In each of your cases, the sentence will be one of detention during His Majesty's pleasure, with a minimum term of 15 years, 110 days.
After the verdict was announced, Kellyan's mother, Marie Bokassa, stood outside the court, her voice breaking as she said the pain of losing her son would never go away. She appealed to everyone, especially young people, to put down knives before a rash act ruins their lives and takes the lives of others. The response from the community and anti-knife violence groups has only added to the significance of the case. Many have stressed, this death is more than a statistic. It's a coffin, wreaths, and a funeral, a stark reminder of the real-life consequences of knife violence. The Kellyan Bokassa case has come to an end, but it still echoes as a warning. This is not only a crime on the fateful bus, but also exposes the blind love for the streets, the indifference of the community, and the tragedy of children exploited by gangs from an early age. Untreated mental trauma contributed to pushing the incident into a spiral of violence. The most haunting moment is Kellyan's weak cry of "Mommy" in the chaotic bus compartment, then forever silent. It is a symbol of irreparable loss, and at the same time a reminder that if society is not more determined, similar tragedies will recur. What do you think about this case? Is the sentence for the two teenagers enough to deter plastic surgery among young people? And if you witnessed a similar situation on the bus, what would you do? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for accompanying until the end of the video.